Good evening. It is Tuesday, June 30th, 2026. NASA has issued a solicitation for an enduring human presence on the lunar surface. The solicitation was comprehensive. The human presence is currently aspirational. Back on the primary planet, specifically Florida, Governor DeSantis has signed a ban on local governments pursuing net zero emissions goals. The policy is a crackdown on what he calls radical climate policies. The logic is impeccable. If you legislate the end of the goal, the problem ceases to exist in the minutes of the meeting. The heat was oppressive. The heat was not mentioned in the press release. We are also tracking a report from the world of software. A group of engineers has warned that we are the last generation that knows how the legacy systems actually function. It seems we have built a civilization on code that no one can read. Welcome to the future.
Alistair, the air here in Durban is heavy with the smell of burning rubber and salt. I am standing on a street that the local authorities described as secured. There are 2,000 people marching 3 blocks away who would disagree. The protesters have set an arbitrary deadline for undocumented migrants to leave the country. I want to be really clear, these aren't just statistics. I just spoke to a woman named Adanya. She is hiding in a basement with 4 children because her shop was marked with a red cross. The official statement calls this a migration recalibration. Adanya calls it a hunt. What people aren't saying is that the police are simply watching the clock. The deadline has passed. The streets are unusually quiet. That is usually when the worst things happen. I can hear the chanting getting louder.
Victoria, look, the incentives here are transparent. You have a domestic labour market with a retention problem and a political class running a Series B on populism. This isn't a hunt. It is a market correction at scale. When the state stops providing a viable social contract, the street-level actors attempt to pivot. Victoria finds the red crosses on the doors chilling. I find them to be a very low-tech version of a geolocation tag. It is a crude way of managing inventory when the official database has crashed. You can't run a country on sentiment. You run it on resources. If the resource-to-human ratio doesn't track, the system purged the excess. It's cold, yes. But it's also the only predictable outcome when the burn rate of public trust exceeds the actual budget. It tracks, Victoria. It just doesn't feel good.
Ronald, your ability to describe a riot as a market correction is almost impressive. Almost. While we discuss the collapse of social contracts, let's look at the collapse of actual infrastructure. In Venezuela, more than 100 people deported from the United States on an ICE flight are currently missing. They were being held in a hotel in La Guaira when the earthquake struck. The building is gone. The government described the hotel as a temporary processing facility. The facility was functional. The facility was not structural. Meanwhile, in the digital realm, Postgres 19 is being previewed. It promises better indexing for data that we may soon lose the ability to interpret. We are perfecting the filing cabinet while the building is on fire. This is the 14th time this month I have used the word unprecedented. I am starting to suspect it's a lie.
Alistair, I need to go back to that hotel in La Guaira. I have a transcript from a survivor. He said the ICE flight landed, they were marched into the lobby, and the doors were locked from the outside. 3 hours later, the ground moved. There is a child's backpack caught in the rebar. It is bright yellow. Ronald, I want to be really clear. You talk about inventory management. These people were returned to sender and then the sender's porch collapsed. The U.S. authorities say their responsibility ended when the wheels touched the tarmac. The Venezuelan authorities say the responsibility was never theirs because the flight was unauthorized despite it being an official deportation. They are literally caught in a jurisdictional void made of concrete and dust. Nobody is digging. The incentives to save people who technically don't exist on any ledger are, apparently, zero. How does that track?
It tracks because the liability was successfully offloaded. Victoria, you're describing a tragic hardware failure. ICE executed the delivery. The signature was obtained at the tarmac. The fact that the receiving warehouse was in a seismic zone is a known unknown in the risk assessment. Yeah. It's a bad look. It's a PR disaster. But from a purely operational standpoint, the deportation was a success. The individuals were removed from the domestic balance sheet. What happens post-delivery is a local governance issue. If you want to blame someone, blame the lack of building codes in a failed state. Don't blame the logistics company for the earthquake. The irony here is that the Supreme Court just upheld birthright citizenship. So, the system is protecting the abstract right to belong while physically removing the bodies that tried to exercise it. The logic is perfectly circular. It is a closed loop.
Clear skies. The chandelier cluster is visible at 27,000 light-years. Each star is an individual light bulb. Surface temperatures in Florida exceed 38 degrees Celsius. Local humidity is 92%. Probability of grid failure, 44%. In the Virginia data corridor, 37 centers are drawing peak load. Local schools have been instructed to deactivate air conditioning. Probability of student heat stroke, 18%. Heavy-duty diesel emissions continue to decline in the study model. Total lives saved by 2040, 100,000. Current lives being impacted by thermal exhaust, all of them. High pressure remains stationary. The atmosphere is thick. The atmosphere is heavy. Probability of cooling, 0. Please remain indoors and minimize respiratory activity. The air is no longer a public utility. It is a private exhaust.
Thank you, Casper. It's always comforting to know the stars are sparkling while the schools are sweltering. Speaking of aesthetics, the Trump administration's plan to redesign every.gov website using AI has hit a snag. The National Design Studio has delayed the rollout. Apparently, the AI design horrors were a bit too honest. One prototype for the IRS featured a labyrinth that led to a dead end. Another for the Department of Energy showed a sun that was actually a giant eye. The official statement says the delay is to ensure a unified brand identity. The brand identity of the government is currently a broken hyperlink. We are spending billions on the interface while the backend is maintained by 3 guys in Nebraska who are the only ones who remember how to speak COBOL. The facade is beautiful. The foundation is a mystery.
I'm in that Virginia county Casper mentioned. I am standing outside an elementary school. It is 36 degrees. Across the street is a windowless gray building that hums. It is a data center. It is perfectly climate controlled to 68 degrees to keep the chips from melting. The children are sitting in a classroom with the windows open, but there is no breeze. One teacher told me they had to turn off the smartboards because they generated too much heat. The irony is that those smartboards are likely connected to the servers in the building across the street. The data center is processing AI models to optimize energy efficiency for a future that these kids are too hot to study for. I want to be really clear, we are prioritizing the comfort of silicon over the safety of carbon. The humming sound is constant. It sounds like a requiem.
Victoria, it's a simple case of electricity arbitrage. The data center has a higher revenue per kilowatt than a third-grade classroom. In a resource-constrained environment, the juice goes to the high-margin asset. You call it a requiem. I call it a capex priority. If those kids want the AC back on, they should probably figure out how to be more computationally valuable. Yeah. Look, The county signed the deal because the data center pays the property taxes that fund the school. It's a parasitic relationship that we've branded as a community partnership. You can't have the tax revenue without the heat. It's a package deal. The incentives are to keep the servers cool so the tax checks keep cleared. If the students faint, that's an externalized cost. It's not on the balance sheet. It's just physics. And physics doesn't have a lobbyist.
Physics may not have a lobbyist, Ronald, but the defense industry certainly does. In the UK, Keir Starmer has trimmed social budgets to find an extra £15 billion for defense. This is to hit the NATO spending target. The target is a number. The social budget was a service. Meanwhile, the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, plans to work some days in London as the Prime Minister. No, wait. He plans a number 10 unit in Manchester if he becomes leader. It's a fascinating pivot. He wants to decentralize power by bringing the center to his house. The plan is described as revolutionary. The revolution consists of a new office with better train links. We are arming for a war we can't afford, led by people who want to govern from their preferred zip code. Everything is fine.
Finally, let's talk about the FDA. RFK Jr. has successfully stacked a panel with the peptide peddlers. These are people selling unverified, untested anti-aging compounds as the next frontier of human health. The FDA scientists are opposing it. They say these substances are potentially harmful. The panel says the scientists are just gatekeepers protecting Big Pharma. The play here is to bypass the scientific method entirely and move straight to the market. It's a Series A for immortality. If you can convince the public that the regulators are the enemy, you can sell them anything. Even poison. Especially poison if it's packaged as freedom. Yeah. We are reaching a point where objective truth is being treated as a regulatory hurdle. When the panel approves a drug that hasn't been tested, they aren't improving health. They are improving the velocity of capital. The bodies will follow. They always do.
The Supreme Court today upheld the principle of birthright citizenship. It is a system designed to ensure that the accident of geography becomes a permanent legal identity. It was built by men who wanted to define who belonged and who did not. The system worked exactly as intended this morning. It protected the status of millions born within the lines on the map. But those same lines are why a hotel in Venezuela was full of people who were told they did not belong. No one is technically responsible for the hotel's collapse. The pilots followed orders. The guards followed protocol. The tectonic plates followed physics. We have created a world where you can be legally protected by a map while being physically destroyed by the same logic. If the system is working perfectly, and people are still buried in the rubble, what was the system actually designed to save?